Today on Dirt Lifestyle, we're going to cover a topic that many of you have been asking for a long time, and that is a complete guide to wiring all the different off-road systems. For those of us that like to do overlanding or rock crawling or whatever, we're going to cover dual battery setup. We're going to cover compressor wiring, locker wiring, all of it. We're going to wire up a switch panel. This is going to be a good video for those of you that are new to this world and you want to learn some stuff about 12-volt wiring. So anyway, this video is going to be huge. It's going to be very comprehensive, so we better get started. It's taken me almost 6 months to collect all the parts and pieces to do this video. A system like this is very expansive and it takes a lot of work and a lot of careful planning to make sure you have everything whenever you start. As we work our way through the system, I'm going to tell you where I got each part and piece and how to install it. And the first thing I want to start with is going to be this dual battery setup. These are the two most common ways to install dual batteries. And this first way is how most vehicles come from the factory if they come from the factory with dual batteries. So like a 1-ton diesel truck or something like that. Now there could be some exceptions to this rule, but the average diesel truck, at least here in the States, it's gonna come where the alternator is tied into the first battery and then there's a little jumper that goes from the first battery to the second battery. Super simple. It makes it to where whenever you need to start that big diesel motor with that big diesel starter, you've got a big well of juice to turn that starter, even after it's been sitting for a little while, because that's the whole concept here. Your 100% voltage level is going to be 12.6, but after a week of sitting or whatever, it's going to diminish. It might get down to 12.4 volts or 12.2. And since you have both batteries hooked up, you have, even with the lower voltage, you have a deeper well of amperage to pull from to start that engine, which is why even though you could turn over that diesel motor with one fully charged battery, they give you two because they know in the real world that thing's gonna sit every once in a while and you still gotta be able to start it even though you have a lower voltage in the battery. I really hope that all that makes sense and you can follow me. So anyway, this is a completely viable option for a lot of people. But for me, it's not going to be, and for a lot of you watching, it's not going to be. If you have like a fridge that's going to be running all night, and you're doing more than just running like a light so you can read or something like that. Because what happens is if you drop the voltage of your secondary battery, it's also going to drop the voltage of your first battery, and this could make it to where you can't start the truck to get out of wherever it is that you're camping. So we're going to add an isolator, and the way that this is going to be wired up is essentially the same, but we put an isolator in between that jumper. So we're going to have an alternator that's going to charge the first battery, then we're going to have a jumper that's going to go from the first battery to the second battery with an isolator in between the two. And this isolator will keep these systems completely independent unless it sees 13.3 volts. Why is this important? This is important because if we come up to camp, we turn the vehicle off, we have all of our accessories hooked up through this second battery, so we're going to be dropping our voltage all night, so we're going to go from 12.6 to 12.4 to 12.2 to 12.0, and this battery is going to become very dead. It's going to be hard for it to start a vehicle. Well, because this isolator keeps these independent unless the vehicle is running, it makes it to where even when you key the ignition on to start the vehicle the next day, you're still going to have less than that 13.3 volts. So it won't even connect the two batteries together until the system is running. Because once it's actually fired up and running and the alternator kicks on, then that's going to bump the juice up to 14.4. And then once the isolator sees above that 13.3 from the alternator, it knows that it can basically turn on and open up and it'll start charging both batteries. So this is exactly how we're gonna wire this up today. And we have a kit that I got from a company off of Amazon I'm gonna show you right now. I contacted Keyline Chargers about working with us because their kit checks every single box. This is very easy to install, it's very affordable, and you can get it on Amazon so you don't have to go search around for something that meets all these demands. But the first thing I need to do is to drop both new Optima batteries in place, and then we can tie everything together using this kit from Keyline. Every good house starts with a solid foundation, and these batteries are absolutely the foundation we need for this build. We are super limited on mounting locations underneath the hood of this Land Rover, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a bracket out of some scrap material I've got laying around, and hopefully we can mount this in a place that makes sense. Later on in this video, we're going to be installing a couple of high amp relays and need a place to mount those too, so we're just going to try to hit 3 birds with 1 stone and put it all in this bracket. Peel the lower cover off of this isolator, you'll notice that there's a couple of knockouts on each side, and this is so you can route the wire in and out of the isolator in a clean way and pick a route that best suits your needs. We've got 1 post that connects to the starter battery, 1 post that connects to our secondary battery, and then 1 ground. So I'm going to connect the wire to the isolator, run it out to the length I need, trim it, and then crimp a new fitting on the end. As you just saw, wiring this isolator was super simple. It went in extremely easy, and this is one of those jobs that I truly believe just about anybody with basic hand tools can do. So this is something that we're going to test at the very end of the video to make sure that the isolator is working, because I did skip 1 step in the instructions, and we'll get to that at the end of the video. I don't think that it's necessary for this setup. Anyway, for those of you that are interested in this isolator, because I get questions about the products I use in every video, just click the Amazon shopping cart. There's an Amazon link in the description of this video. Click it, then click the title of this video, and there's going to be a whole list of, I'm going to put tools that I use today in there. I'm going to put spade connectors. I'm going to put this isolator. I'm even going to put the batteries. Speaking of batteries, people are so opinionated about batteries, almost as bad as they are about tires, that I've discovered this since I started a YouTube channel. And I want to give a little explanation as to why I use Optima, because I've been asked this a number of times over the last 2 years of me having a YouTube channel. I have a battery on the table over there that I bought in 2005. It's an Optima red top, and it still holds a charge. And then about 5 years ago, I took it out of my Jeep and I put in a yellow top, and both batteries have been great. I've had Optimas in so many vehicles, including my tow truck. It'll sit for 3 weeks. It'll still start. I've had nothing but great luck with them. So because of that, I just continue to buy them. I even used that red top in like a boat for a trolling motor. I've used it for all kinds of stuff, and now I just use it to like bench test lights. And if I get a used car that needs a battery, that I'll just throw that in there temporarily until I buy a new one. So anyway, the experience has been good, so I'm going to continue to use them. The reason that I reached out to Optima and asked for these blue tops specifically is because they have extra 5/16 studs that poke out of the top. And the reason that's important is because whenever you're installing all these extra off-road accessories, you need a place to wire that. And if you just have one standard 2-post battery, you're having to wire all your accessories and everything to just 2 little posts. And if you get one of these blue tops, it has these extra 5/16 studs, and you just doubled your ease to install this extra stuff. And in our case, we quadrupled it because we added an extra battery on top of that. So we have 8 posts instead of 2, which is going to make it so much easier for us to cleanly install all these accessories. So then the next thing I want to install is probably going to be our switch panel. Four-Wheel Parts sent me the switch panel from ProComp, and these have gained a lot of popularity over the last few years, and for good reason. A switch panel like this is easy to mount, all the wiring's pretty much done, you just need to plug in the various harnesses, and then you have 6 outputs that can go to various accessories. For us, it's going to be lights, compressors, things like that. And although in the past I've mostly used just regular rocker switches, this method saves so much time and so much space in the cab that it's just really a no-brainer. I buy these firewall grommets in bulk off Amazon as a clean way to pass wire through your firewall without cutting up the edges of your wire. I'm going to use this point of connection as a pass-through for multiple wires throughout this installation today. can definitely install this kit without cutting or trimming any wire. You can just roll up any access that you have and zip tie it together, but I like to have everything mounted as cleanly as possible, so I trimmed this wire to fit, crimped a new end on, and hooked it to the battery. With the power and the ground hooked up for this control box, we just need to find an ignition source. And luckily for me, right behind this battery is a fuse panel. So what we're going to do is try to find a place to use a fuse tap that we're just going to basically plug in a fuse that we determine only turns on whenever the ignition is in the on position. So I'm using my power probe to test which ones of these fuses turn on and off in the on and off position, and then we can tap into that power with our fuse tap, which will then energize the control box. And now with all this hooked up, we're ready for the next step. For those of you who are brand new to wiring up 12 volt, bear with me on this part. There's going to be a lot to digest, but it's very important information that you need to have whenever you size the different parts of your system that you're going to be building for your 4x4. So I drew everything out to kind of give me like a visual aid to hopefully convey these concepts to you and make it to where whenever you build your system, you can kind of reference back to some of this stuff, and it'll give you an idea of what kinds of things to look for and what kinds of things you might run into. Anyhow, we've got a control panel. If we pushed the rock light button on the control panel, it would send a signal down into the control box, which then sends a signal down to our rock lights. Very simple. This is how this system is supposed to work. But we had to make a slight alteration to the system, and I'll show you why. So with the rock lights, we're at 0.4 amps per light, and so that's 2.4 amps for all 6 lights together. There's a peak threshold on each individual circuit in this box, and that peak threshold is 20 amps. So at 2.4, we are way below that peak threshold, and that makes it super easy to install something like rock lights, especially with something like this ProComp control box system thing, whatever you would call it. But if you are adding electronic devices that use a lot more juice than that 2.4 amps, then you might go above this peak threshold, making it to where you have to add a larger relay to sustain the load. So for our compressors, this is just like the best example ever. These Smittybilt 2781 compressors are super fast for a 12 volt compressor, but that speed comes at a cost, and that cost is that they use a lot of juice. So we're at 45 amps peak load for each one of these, peak amp load, which gives us 90 amp total draw because they're both on the same circuit. So whenever we push our button on the control panel, that then tells the relay inside our control box to then send a signal through our 90 to 120 pressure switch, and this is in our tank, and that basically makes it to where it kills the compressors, anything above 120, and then it excites the compressors. It tells the compressors to turn on at anything under 90 psi. So once the signal goes through our pressure switch, it then goes into our relay, and this relay is a 200 amp continuous output relay. So the continuous part is very important. This is essentially a starter relay that is built to be able to have a continuous load on it, which is perfect for our application here. So we have 90 amp draw, we have a 200 amp relay, so we're well within the threshold of that relay, and we now have a safe system. It's a bummer because there's basically a relay in here and a relay in there, and there's a little bit of redundancy here, but in order to keep the simplicity of having all of our switches on just one panel, this is just the easiest way for me to do it. Now, we had to do the exact same thing with our Baja Designs LP6s because these lights are insane bright, and those of you that own them know these are crazy bright. But that brightness comes at a cost, and that cost is electricity. So even though they're LED and they do use very little current or very little amps for the amount of light that they emit, they still, at the end of the day, use quite a bit of light. So for all 4 of these LP6s, at 6.5 amps a piece, we're at 26 amps for the 4 lights on the roof, and that is over our single current threshold number, whatever. It's 20 amps, so we're 6 amps above that. And personally, I would want to have a separate relay if we were anywhere even close to this. If we were at like 16 amps, I would start to think, maybe we should do an external relay. But at 26 amps, The decision's been made for us. So what I decided to do is just get 2 of the exact same relay. These relays are actually really affordable, plus a little bit of redundancy goes a long way. If I wanted to carry 1 spare 200 amp relay, it would be a replacement for both systems. And it gives us the ability to add more lights later on if we want to. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be our wire. How do you know what size wire to use in what system? What I would recommend you do is you go on Google, just type in 12 volt wire sizing chart, something along those lines. And you're going to come up with a whole bunch of results, and they're all going to be about the exact same numbers. And that is going to be these numbers over here. So for our rock lights, 2.4 amps is what the total draw is going to be for the whole system. And as you're going to see in these charts, the longer distance your last light is away from your source, it's going to make it to where you need to upsize the wire more and more the farther you get away from your source. So for 0 to 10 amps, that would be the range that we're in with 2.4. If we go all the way to 10 to 13 feet, which by the way, this chart goes way bigger. I just had to make it small enough to go in here. So I'd say it's probably 15 feet or so from the source to where the last light is going to be in the system. And that makes it to where we need 12 gauge wire in order to meet the demand of 12.4 amps and have it travel that long of a distance. However, one last thing to consider whenever you're sizing everything is that not all of you're going to be knocking away amps along the way for that distance. So that doesn't mean that we need a 12 gauge wire to go to the last light. It just means that you need to use this chart to make the decision on when you neck down that wire, because the last light is only 0.4 amps. So you get where I'm going with this. You don't have to make it to where you have a 12 gauge wire going from the source all the way to the last light. You just need to size it using this chart based on what the data says here, and then just make your best judgment. So everything that I have bought for this system and everything that I designed for the system is all based on these charts, because I'm not an engineer, but these charts make it to your average Joe like you and me can safely size an electrical system and make sure that you don't have a bunch of problems or fires in the future. Thing I want to hook up is going to be the wiring for the front and rear air lockers, and this is actually extremely simple. There's 2 wires coming out of each solenoid, and you can determine which one is positive and which one is negative. So I'm going to hook up the positive wire for each solenoid into the harness plug that goes to the control box, and then I'm going to tie both grounds together and just ground them to the chassis. The next thing I want to connect is going to be our compressor relay to the battery, and then our compressors to the relay. And then after that, I'm going to move on to all of our lighting and everything that's on the roof. And for the roof lighting, I'm going to use that heavy duty relay like we talked about on the drawing board. And once I get a game plan of how I'm going to get all these different wires onto the roof, we'll go over what I did and how I overcame that challenge. But for now, I've got a ton of work to do, and so I'm just going to get to it. I promise, this is the last time we're going to the whiteboard in this episode. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page for each one of these little things that we're going to be installing. So now that we've installed everything for, or everything that I want to use whenever the vehicle's running, I want to talk about everything we're going to use while the vehicle's not running, and then we're going to go and just install this stuff, and then we'll do like a walk around, and we're just going to push buttons and test systems and just make sure that it all works. So our overland power, that's what we're going to call this system, all is being pulled off of our secondary battery. And if you remember, whenever we key it off, this isolator is going to see a voltage drop, and then it's going to isolate the two systems. So we're going to go from the battery through a 25 amp circuit breaker. And again, all this stuff, just Amazon stuff, anybody can get it. I'll put it in the shopping cart. And the reason that I chose a circuit breaker is because I don't have to carry a separate fuse, and I'm protected. So if I'm in the middle of a trip and for whatever reason this circuit breaker blows on me, I can go through and make sure that I'm not grounding out anywhere, and I can reset the circuit breaker, and then boom, my fridge is running again. Instead of me fumbling around trying to make sure that I have the right fuse or whatever the situation may be, I just like circuit breakers for that kind of thing. So we're going to go from a 25 amp circuit breaker through 8 gauge wire to a fuse box that we're going to mount in the rear of the vehicle. And this fuse box is going to then supply power to each one of these systems individually, and it's going to give us a layer of protection on the small scale. So if like we have a ground somehow our power wire grounds itself on the way to power this light, it's just going to pop the little fuse. It's not going to take everything out. But if we have a really big problem and our 8 gauge wire wears through somewhere else, we have this second layer of protection with this 25 amp breaker, and that's going to help keep us from like catching on fire. The stuff that we really don't want to happen in the middle of nowhere. So the way that I size this 8 gauge wire is just using those charts we talked about earlier. This 8 gauge wire is good for up to 35 amps at 22 feet. The vehicle's less than 22 feet long. We won't have that much wire, but we have a built-in buffer. So, but our breaker should pop 10 amps before we reach that maximum amp rating, and we're not even 22 feet long. So you see what I'm getting at here. So we have two different things that are tied into our camping wiring that isn't necessarily camping related, but kind of camping adjacent. And the reason that I did this is just for simplicity of install. So our micro mobile radio is going to be tied into our fuse box, just because I don't like those little tube fuses. I never carry spares, and I don't want it to be like tucked in a dash or something, and I have to, like, if the radio goes out, I'm having to like check a fuse under there. I would way rather just go pop the gullwing window, look at this thing, and then see if I've got a blown fuse. It's so much simpler. So we're going to wire this directly into the fuse box. And what's kind of nice about that anyway, instead of it being on the system that relies on the vehicle running, is that if I'm waiting for someone to get to camp, I can leave the radio on, and then if they're getting close and I start to hear them, then I can communicate with them because this is just all pulling off of our secondary battery. The other system that's going to be not really camping related that we're tying into this fuse box because of ease of install is going to be our air controller. So we've got the air switch controller that controls the rear airbags, and it doesn't use a whole lot of juice, and it's only just enough juice to like open and close a solenoid, and that's it. So that's not really going to wear the battery down anyway. But for the same reason, I just want to keep it simple and have a fuse for that right here in the back of the vehicle. The way that I sized all of this up is I just added the amps for each device all up to make sure that I had a big enough wire to supply these different systems. The biggest one, of course, is going to be our fridge. It's a fridge freezer combo. It's an ARB Zero fridge. The thing is super rad. It actually doesn't use a whole lot of power, but whenever it turns on that compressor, it spikes pretty high. So it spikes, I've seen spikes as high as up to 12 amps, and I just want to make sure that we're protected, and so I sized everything accordingly. So then we have two lights that we're going to install back there under the Goldwing windows. Did I say Goldwing? Under the Goldwing windows, and it's basically, these little Baja Designs lights are just like their rock lights, but they have their own independent switch. So there's no relays or any of that. I literally just wire this into our fuse box, and then whenever I open up that Goldwing window and I need it, I just push the button. Then whenever I don't need it, push the button again, and it turns off. Super simple. And again, these are only 0.4 amps, so these barely draw anything anyway. And then we're going to have this little 12-volt charge port. So if I want to charge something overnight, or this is actually going to just be our 12-volt power too for the fridge. But either way, I've got a way that I can turn this on and off if I just want to kill the fridge whenever we're done with the trip. I can just kill this whole system right here with a switch. So this is just a nice way to simplify everything. Again, more Amazon goodies, nothing special here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to make our connection. Well, I need to build a bracket, I guess, to mount our breaker. and then we're gonna make that connection from the battery to the breaker, and then we're just gonna start running wire back and tying everything together. I like the way our brushed aluminum bracket turned out on the passenger side, so I'm going to replicate that for something a little bit smaller on the driver's side to hold this breaker up out of the way and give it a clean place to mount. Mounting this GM RS radio is just as easy as you think it would be. The only thing that I'm going back and forth on is where to locate the antenna. I think for now I'm going to locate it on the hood because the bracket that I have makes it super easy to do that, but long term I might figure out a way to get this on the roof. I decided to repurpose this factory power port, so instead of being wired into the ignition, it's just wired into the secondary battery like everything else we're using back here. Like we talked about on the whiteboard, we've got juice coming from the battery into our circuit breaker. So now we should have power to everything. And then that wire runs through the firewall where we have that grommet that we installed at the beginning of the video. And it powers all of our various systems. I guess we could start with our little air solenoid here. You can hear the relays clicking. So that is going to be able to fill and empty our rear airbags. We can check this guy. This, we turn on, boom, we've got power. So that's good news. So we can keep working our way back. I know I'm gonna get questions about why I chose this unit and everything. I like this one because it's got all the controls and everything right here in your hand. And so you can remote mount these guys. Like the seat's gonna actually be forward a little bit and it's gonna be kind of hidden back there, and I don't have to access anything on it to turn this on and off. That's why I chose this specific model. And we are actually, we have an affiliate program going with Midland, so if you guys are interested in these, make sure you click the link in the description. Anyway, the wire runs underneath this piece of trim right here. Well, a couple of wires, but the big one that powers all this stuff, the 8-gauge wire, runs underneath all this and then back into here and to the fuse box, just like we talked about. And this fuse box is impossible to film when you're working on it, but there, you can kind of see it a little bit. So I've just got everything tied in. I haven't labeled any of it yet, but this cover comes off. We've got access to all of our fuses right here. And in theory, everything should be on. So let's check it all out. We're gonna start with this light. Boom, we've got a light. It's very exciting. Oh, and actually, we've got a voltage meter over here. I'm curious what it says. 12.9, I'd say that's pretty good. We'll zoom in so you guys can see that too. So this has a voltage reading on it, which is awesome because it's just a convenient way to check the voltage of the battery as we're camping and whatnot. Also, I ended up plugging the fridge into a factory, it's a factory, like not, I want to say USB port. Sorry, I'm so tired, guys. Factory cigarette lighter charge port back here. And this usually goes into the main battery, but I pulled the wire and everything off the back and I plugged this into the system that we just installed. So that way I took advantage of something that was already here. We wired it into our new system and now I have 2 of these 12-volt sources, so I can plug this into something else in the future if I want. But basically our fridge is just going to be permanently plugged into this bad boy. So anyway, turn that off. I guess we go see if the fridge works. Looks like it's on to me. Sweet, it's running. So the other thing would be our other light. What else do we have to check, guys? I think that's pretty much it, isn't it? Yeah, pretty simple. All the wires tucked in, nice and tidy. I'm very pleased with what we put together here today. There is a couple more things that I do want to address because I know I'm going to get questions on it. And one would be our DRLs, our daytime running lights, which is, for me, it's just chase lights. So if we key this on, we push DRL. I know I'm going to be getting questions about this. I put some extra lights back here, nice and high, and they're amber. And this one's, it's halfway behind this, but you can still see it. I mean, it's still emitting light up there. My hand's yellow. But anyway, the reason that I did this is because when you're going off-road and you're in a group and you're just hauling on these dirt roads, it gets really hard to see the guy in front of you because of all the dust. And so I tied all this in, I tied these two lights back here into this DRL system just to make it so if someone's trying to follow me, they can see and they don't like run into me because they think that they're just driving into dust and they're actually driving into Nate. Same thing up here. I've got these lights. This is like a two-stage light, so we have the really bright LED, and then we have the backlit portion, and I have the backlit portion tied into this DRL system, and same thing up here. So if someone is leading the group and I'm behind them, it's going to be harder for them to lose me. If they look back and they see these lights, they know that I'm still following. So it's just one of those things you don't necessarily have to have, but I really wanted to have whenever I built this system. Let's do one quick walkthrough under the hood, so I can show you guys exactly how all this came together. It's so hard to make this much wire clean, but I did my best, just giving everything long swoops. You know, I think these brackets look halfway decent. They at least match the other aluminum stuff that I've built. And yeah, it all seems to be functioning so far. So we'll see once we actually do a real off-road test. I know I'm gonna get questions about these. I don't like this style connection into the battery, but this is what came with the vehicle, and I forgot to order the upgraded, like something that we could actually like crimp. So there's gonna be some more work that I'm gonna be doing behind the scenes in the future to clean some of this up. But in the meantime, we at least have a functional electrical system. Thank you very much for making it all the way to the end of this video. These are such a labor of love for me. I don't get a lot of views on any of the stuff where I'm building like this. People usually like to watch my adventure, but I like to get this information out there. So if you do enjoy any of this work that I'm doing here in the shop, make sure you hit the thumbs up button every once in a while and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because that really helps us with the algorithm and just helps the growth of our channel overall. If you want to help support us in other ways, you can go to thedirtlifestyle.com. We have t-shirts, hats, neck gaiters, all the stuff I tell you about at the end of all these videos. And my wife just redid the website with a web developer, and they did a beautiful job. So if you haven't seen it yet, definitely go over to our website and check it out. We have a Patreon link there as well. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm @DirtLifestyleNate. We'll see you next time.